paint them in.
That's for your notebook, though.
Yes. But I work lightly. You don't want to grind it in there. It's not Crayola. And I don't mind if I do it a little too large. Because you're going to be editing with lighter values anyway, so I'll put it in there. But again, I let a lot of the background or a lot of the ground show through. Because I'm going to build layers, and if I paint too heavily on this canvas, it won't take many more layers. And just by the weight of the pastel, you can vary the darkness. And I'm not concerned about the value, about the actual hue. What's important is that it's dark. Think of your darks and your second. When I say darks, I mean the darks and the secondary darks. A dark, just for definition purposes, a dark is anything that is a darker value than your middle tone. So this is my middle tone. It's about a 50% value. Anything darker than this is a dark. Anything lighter than this is a light. And see how I put in a dark blue here, and the bushes here are not blue, but it's dark, and with just simply glazing over them with a kind of a red brown, I can quickly change that hue effect. In terms of working with pastel, you have to learn to get a feel for it, because the pressure is very important. The harder you press, the darker it's going to be when you're working with a dark pastel. So you can vary the value considerably by the weight you put on it, and you can also vary how much you fill up the tube. Hold your pastel lightly and don't use much weight when you're putting it in. Save heavy application for the last third of the painting. We're just talking about laying in the big shapes right now. I'm not going to worry about the detail in here. I'll be painting in these lighter shapes later. And here, it's not so much important that it be exactly the same color of blue, for example, but it needs to be blue for several reasons. One being that as things are in the distance, they tend to go blue because the yellow is filtered out, so you don't want to lose perspective by making things too warm when they're at a distance. And as long as I leave the pastel reasonably thin in terms of the texture here, it'll be easy to glaze over with the lighter values later on, so I'm not worrying about those lighter values right now. Just want that to build up. I tend to drop my pastels a lot because I'm holding them fairly loosely. And also, rather than using my more expensive soft pastels for this underpainting, I don't mind using a lot of the hard pastels because they're relatively cheap.
The new pastel, right?
Yeah, new pastels. And when I get to the soft pastels, I may totally cover this, but at least I'm working on a value. And I'm doing a lot of squinting right now. I'm squinting at this, and I'm squinting at that, and I'm saying, okay, the values are looking about right. One of the things about the working with your darks and so forth, they are essentially equivalent to the sculptor's stone or wood. They're what you're going to chisel out your lighter values You know, if you're doing a sculpture, you chip away at the wood or the rock, and you got to have the rock to do it. Well, you got to have the darks to chisel into them, so you can make the darks bigger than they really are, so that you can chisel into them. So, for example, I'm kind of laying in some of these darks here, and I make them bigger than what I think they really are, because when I start putting in the lights, if the darks are too small, then I'll chisel into the smaller darks, and I'll eat away my darks. And so I want to make them bigger than they really are, knowing that I can cut into them. But if I'm too timid with my darks and make them too small, they will slowly disappear. I try to get an overall value structure before I go into doing any strong detail. I want to establish roughly where my darks and lights are overall, and then I'll go into my center of interest and work on it. Some of the values are almost the same, but this is a warm dark and this is a cool dark, and that really makes a big difference. I like to be fairly careful in my drawing and loose in my painting, because I feel free to be loose in my painting if I'm careful in my drawing. I don't know if it's psychological or not, but if I get too loose in my drawing, then I tighten up in my painting. Okay, let me think here. I think I'm ready to go put in some lighter values and brighter values. And my lightest lights is some of the buildings in here, and the roofs, and of course these cliffs up here, the sky in the foreground, but these buildings are the lightest lights. And when I put in my lighter values, I might put them in just a tad darker than they really are, because I can always come in and lighten them again. It's always better to be a little dark and then lighten up later. And where the center of interest is, be sure to have a good dark next to a light. You increase all the contrast. You have the warmest warms next to the coolest cools, the lightest lights next to the darkest darks, soft values next to hard. When you put in a light, you put in a real light, then you want to go to the next darkest light. So just like you go in your darkest darks, and then your secondary darks, you go in your lightest light, and then your secondary light. So this is a light area in here, but I'm starting out with something that's a step or two darker, because I want, when I put in my lighter values, some of this dark will show through. I started this painting a couple of months ago at a workshop in Santa Fe, and when I brought it home to do some touch-up work on it, after thinking I'd finished it, I realized I'd made a big mistake that is easy to do when you paint under unusual lighting. I wasn't really aware at the time just how bright the lighting was in the room I was working in. It's kind of like plein air painting. If you work outside and you get very strong sunlight on your painting surface, you tend to paint too dark because the light is so strong. Whereas when you're painting in a studio with more subdued lighting and under lighting that is more like what the painting is going to be viewed in, your colors and values are really more accurate. So what happened was my painting came out really considerably darker than I would have liked. So now that I'm in the studio, I'm going to try to correct that. It's taken me so long because I had broken my wrist and hadn't been able to get back to painting here for a couple of months. But now that I can get back in my studio and compare my values to the original, I saw my mistake. And now I'm going to see if I can correct it. Even though I put in several layers of pastel on the surface, I'm going to see if I can paint over it. And if I can't paint over some of the darker areas that I want to lighten sufficiently, I'll just simply brush off the old pastel and start over. So let's see how it goes. First of all, when I look at the original on my computer screen, and you'll be able to see that when I compare it, I checked to see what the value was of some of the different darks in here. And I realized that the values in these dark areas, in this ridge here and in the distant mountains, are my particular problem. When I looked on my computer at the original image and checked what the values were, I found that they were around 60 to 65% black, 60 to 65% dark in value. And so when I take my value scale here and hold it up against my surface, I can clearly see that the darks, if I squint a little bit, I can see in this area that the darks are more like 80%. See, this is about 70% here. This is about 60% here. This is 70, 80. This is about how dark it is. I need to be more down, and that goes for up here as well. I need to be more down in this area. And then when I looked at this on the on my monitor, it showed that it was more like 30-35% light. It was about 35%. And if I look at my 30% value here, see how much darker? If you squint a little bit, if I squint a little bit, I can see how much darker that is than 30%. It's more like, it's almost exactly 50%, which is way too dark. And so now I've got an idea. I'm 10 to 20% darker in this area. If I look down here, it's the same. The dark areas of these trees should be around 60%, but they're in the 80% value range. If I squint, I can see it's more like 80%. So that needs to be darkened up too. So I'm going to start out by trying to correct some of the values here, bring up the values and make them more representative of what my original is, because I don't want this picture to be so dark and dreary. I want a little bit of a more representational light, because it's a sunny day. It's not an overcast day, which is what this looks like now. So let's see how well I'm able to lighten up some of this area. Now, some of the areas up in a few spots here are actually about, are pretty dark, but most of it is considerably lighter. So I'm going to test a few colors. Oh, that's a good deal lighter. And this is a very soft pastel. This is a Ludwig, which is nice and soft. I'm going to go up here and just see what that looks like in this scale. It's lighter than this 50%, 50 or 60% here. It's close to it. It needs to be somewhere in this range. So that's a little bit light. So let me see if I can go a little darker. That's lighter still. Sometimes it's kind of a struggle to find the right value. This looks more like it. See how that looks. I'm thinking that's going to work pretty well. See, it's darker than that. It's darker than that. It's more, pretty close to this, which is about right. Close enough. Close enough. It's about 70%, and on my photo that's 65% or so. So now I'm going to put in here, and I'm going to lay in these darker values. See how they cover. And I think I'm going to be happier with this blue mountain here. I'm putting the big simple strokes. Now that's about the color of blue, or this. It's not really the exact color of the mountain in my picture, but it's about the right value. It's the lighter value I wanted. Now I definitely can see how dark this is, how too dark these light cliffs are. We're going to lighten up those cliffs somewhat. There we go. So that's lightened that considerably. That's at least 2 steps lighter, which is what I want. Neutral gray violet here that I'm putting in. These cliff face. I'm having to bear down pretty hard because I'm covering a lot of pastel underneath there. So the tooth is a little full. I'm trying to follow the topography of the movement of the land. I'm going to come into these trees a little bit. I'll have to repaint those somewhat. Now I need to lighten that sky. So, because until I get that skylight, it's kind of hard to judge whether that blue is just still working. Yeah, that's a lighter sky. It looks like the sun's shining there. Now I'm gonna lightly glaze over here, and then I'm gonna do something I don't do much of, but when we're dealing with the sky, I will do some blending. I want a nice soft sky. Once I do some blending up here in the darker area, I want to be sure and clean my fingers off before I come down in the lighter area again. Just slightly softening the edge of that mountain. It's off in the distance. It shouldn't be like a razor sharp. You don't have razor sharp images, especially of a rounded mountain. Now I'll say that when I blend the blue sky, I don't mind blending because I'm blending blue on blue on blue so that I don't get mud. But if I were blending like red and green, I'd get mud. But if we're blending colors that are analogous and that are pretty much on the same side of the color chart, and they're close, like blues or greens, if all the underlying colors are blue, then they blend together nicely. Or if they're all green or some value of green, they blend together. But if you start getting complementary colors and you try to blend those together, it's going to come out as mud. It looks like the sun is out a little bit now. Also, I noticed that my cliff shapes are way too defined and busy looking. They need to be considerably softened up. So I may try a little blending there. You just shouldn't be able to see all that, quite that much detail. Need to save the a detail along the edges rather than too much on the inside. I can blend this a little bit. That's the beauty of pastels. You can just put layer over layer over layer. As I studied this picture a little bit more, I realized I want to separate the ridge in front of the mountains a little bit more. Even though in the picture they kind of blend together, I want a little bit better separation. So I'm going to lighten and add a little bit of a touch of a greenish tint to that ridge to separate it from the background, to kind of help create a overlapping effect. To increase the distance or the sense of distance and perspective in the painting. I also, even though I lightened the cliffs up considerably, I like the values. They're pretty close to what they should be, but they're just a little bit stark. So I'm going to tone them down a little bit, and I'm going to bring up the intensity of some of the color and values in the foreground and the middle ground. So let's see how that goes. And this, I hope, is demonstrating the tremendous ability of pastel to layer one layer on top of another. You don't have to be stuck with a value or a color you don't like. You can paint over it for quite a bit of layering, even on a pastel board like this, which isn't a sanded board, but an ampersand board, which doesn't have as much texture as I usually work with. So let's take a look and see how it goes. This is taking what I call a butterfly touch, very, very light. I'm using a Terry Ludwig soft pastel, and I'm going over this layer of blue and just barely touching the surface, really trying to keep a sensitive feel to that pastel. I don't want to have it lay too heavily. I want to let a lot of the background show through that. I got some blues and purples that I actually like, but I want to separate it by having a lighter edge along some of this ridge that will help separate it from that mountain. And it's a matter of a very light touch. If I get too carried away with it, it'll lose a sense of depth, because I don't want it to be too green. I want to keep that blue tint to it. So now that's helping pull that forward a little bit and separating it from the mountain, the blue mountain in the background. Now it's separated in the picture, in the image from the background mountain considerably better than it was.